What is ADHD?
The ADHD is it's a neurotype, so it's a way that your brain would work that has kind of two different strands. There's should we do an introduction first of all? Because it was like
I was thinking we haven't really talked about an introduction, have we?
It's like, hi, I'm Jasmine, this is Martin,
Yeah.
blah, 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 sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Jasmine and I am the marketing executive at EdShed, and this is Martin Saunders, CEO and co-founder of EdShed. And today we're going to be talking about ADHD and what that looks like as Martin's experience, but also in the classroom and for pupils as well. So we'll start with our first question, which is, what is ADHD?
ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition which affects around 20%, I think, of people, ever rising as more people kind of get found out, if you like. There are two kind of strands to it. There's what you sort of stereotypically think of with ADHD is someone who can't sit still, who, like, typically boys who you want them to stay put and they're roaming around a classroom, for example, as a teacher, which is a kind of hyperactive thing, is kind of what we sort of at one point at least was sort of synonymous with ADHD. There's sort of physical hyperactivity. There's also, you can have a kind of mental hyperactivity. But then the other strand is what gets called inattentive, which is where I think it's kind of the opposite in a way. It's a bit of a misnomer. It's not so much that you're not paying attention, it's just that there is so much happening in your brain that there's so many strands that take your focus that your attention is kind of unreliable and sort of various. So to the person who's you're talking to, who you've just lost the thread, you might seem like you're inattentive, but actually you're paying a lot of attention just to the wrong things. And then you can have like a combined thing where you have both, which is what I have, which is like the bingo card. So and obviously with different people, different kind of aspects of that can be expressed, and obviously people are complicated, so that can kind of come out in different ways, and obviously be more or less obvious depending on the person and the situation, I suppose.
So what was your experience as a child with ADHD, and what are some of the challenges you faced?
I mean, first of all, I suppose I'm unusual, I suppose, and as well as ADHD, I had as a child a thing called hyperlexia, which means I could read when I was ridiculously young. So I was about 3 and I could read quite happily, and so I was like, teachers treated me a bit like the performing sea lion, and just thought, oh, he's so clever, he can read, and just left me alone, which was ideal, if I'm honest. I was also, I suppose, because of that, I learned that it felt good for people to think that I was clever. Whether I am or not is debatable, if I'm honest, but people thought it, and I sort of protected. I worked hard to protect that, and I was interested. And when I was, there's an ADHD thing, like, of hyperfocus, and it's, I suppose, I think in a way, I think my brain's a bit like a plasma ball, if you like. So there's lots going on, and then you get that little bit of hyperfocus, and everything's like, in one spot on one thing, and that means if you've got something which you're really interested in, like, I don't know, dinosaurs, or medieval siege machinery, or the history of the Beaker people, or whatever, you can focus so much. You can actually be quite successful academically as long as it's a thing that catches your interest. And I think I kind of had quite an easy ride through school, really, because I was interested in stuff, and I just had this sort of reputation, I suppose, for teachers that I was smart, so they didn't need to worry about me. I didn't write very much at all. I remember my the stories that your parents like to remind you about. My year 3 teacher at the end of year 3 said that apparently in the whole year I wrote my name once, which probably was, I would not have got away with these days. But again, I coasted through because I did a good job of pretending I was clever. And I was genuinely pretty good at turning it on when I needed to, which again is like the hyperfocus, a little bit of adrenaline, and I'm pretty good. Which I suppose is another little sort of stereotype with ADHD people being good in a crisis. And it's the sort of the adrenaline that brings one thing into enough focus that you can perform. And so when I came to a test or an exam, actually I was like, oh God, I've got to actually do well here, and I kind of got good results because of that. And so again, they just left me alone. So it was, I suppose, later when I was maybe, I suppose, just end of A levels or at university, where there was that bit more kind of academic pressure, I suppose, and where it was like, no, you have to do these things. Certainly, like teacher training, I found incredibly hard because just the degree of scrutiny meant that I couldn't just kind of basically freewheel my way through. I've always got the right outcome, but I had to sort of find my own path through. It was much harder when I was like, no, you've got to do this, then this, then this, then this, and you've got to do it by tomorrow, and that's it, full stop. That was what I found hard.
Do you think that this might be what other children with ADHD experience, or what do you think are some of the most common struggles children with ADHD face in the classroom?
I'm probably atypical, because of, like I say, the sort of hyperlexia is quite rare, and it's sort of like the opposite of dyslexia, I suppose. But I think the stuff about kind of having to work in my own way and my own pace, I think that's going to be something that's a pretty common struggle. And I think there's for children in general, I think it comes down to those sort of strands of ADHD. I think the children who can't help but move, and I mean, like the hyperactive thing, it's not so much a choice, it's a need to. It's like if you've heard of restless leg syndrome, you can't not move your leg, and it's just the same with a child's whole body. And when that they know that no one else is moving, but they can't help it, and they're like, I've just got to go over here, I've just got to do this, I've just and that can be that they're fully aware of that they're different, and the same with losing the thread of what the teacher's saying. If they're sort of like the inattentive strand, again, they know that everyone else, they don't want to ask, they don't want to embarrass themselves. Whereas like, Miss, can you just say that again? And then they don't know what they're doing. And then what happened? And I think what goes wrong for a lot of children, and absolutely, unintentionally, I think from teachers. I don't think any teacher would intentionally sort of, take a child sort of the wrong way from what they need. But it's very hard to tell the difference between a child who what doesn't want to pay attention versus can't pay attention. And so if they get, even without that though, that kids can do stuff that you can't, and the sort of shame that comes of that, of the like, I'm less than them, I'm the stupid one because I can't do, I can't sit still, I can't do this stuff. And and then, as I say, especially if you get the sort of, I think some kids get a lot of reminders of what they can't do. And I think then it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where, a child decides that they're not capable, so they don't try. And then, and then it's and that's where it kind of goes wrong. And I think the challenge, then from a teacher's point of view is sort of bringing them back is much harder than not letting them get there in the first place.
Yeah. So obviously you've been a pupil with ADHD, and then you went on to be a teacher with ADHD. So what was your experiences of being a teacher with ADHD?
Okay, so there's two sides to it, I suppose. There's me as a teacher in the profession, in the school environment. There were things that I found especially hard, and it was that thing of it's the scrutiny, really. Not that I didn't do a good job, but the having to do things at somebody else's kind of pace and need, and there's a thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is kind of, or RSD, which is quite common in ADHD, which is like everything that's criticism feels very viscerally bad. And so there's a lot of criticism in teaching. Every lesson observation, like every worst lesson I've ever taught has been an observation. Every best lesson I've taught has been the one where I haven't planned and I've turned up and I've actually just focused on what the kids need, because I'm thinking about them, not me. And all this, like, the sort of pressurized stuff feels really, really awful as a teacher. I think it made me, however, quite adventurous and imaginative and creative. And it also, I went to great lengths to do lots of novel, interesting things. I found myself using loads of drama, which I never really thought of myself as a drama person. But I found that, intuitively, I wanted to feel that it was real. And so I I would make things real for the children by using things like Conscience Alley, and we'd role play, and we did things like Mantle of the Expert, where I had a topic where it was there was a brief from the Imperial War Museum, was the setup for this history topic about conflict. And there was a teaching assistant, a TA, who was in the TA in the Territorial Army, and I had him put his uniform in, march in, salute, give me the letter, march out, and the kids were like, "What's going on?" And the one goes, "Is this real?" and it was that sort of thing that I, I felt intuitively that I needed to hold their attention kind of in my hands a little bit. I couldn't, but that's because I need to have my attention held in that way, I suppose. And what I found as well was that the those classes that they're sort of a bit notorious. There's always one or two in a school, or it's like every other year sometimes, I think. I worked as a supply teacher for a bit, and you'd go into this classroom and they'd go, "Oh, you've got that class, have you?" And actually those are the ones that I found I was most comfortable with, because I suppose they were just high in. It wasn't that they were naughty so much as there was just a lot of sparky energy in there, because there were a lot of ADHD brains. But actually, because they thought like me, I think they could. There's an intuitive empathy thing where, you go to a. Does anyone go to cocktail? You go to a cocktail party. You go to a networking event. That's what I do. I don't go to cocktail parties really. You go to a networking event and you find yourself in a corner, or a wedding, or whatever function with a load of people. You find yourself chatting with the people who are like you, and it's not intentional, but you do. You gravitate to people who, and like the hobbies that you do, will be the things that other people who think like you do, because you feel relaxed when you've got people around you who you can intuitively kind of understand they're not out to get you. There's no hidden ulterior motive. And I think that's how those kids perceived me a little bit. And I pushed them, I made them work, but I did it in a way where they felt safe, because they understood where I was coming from, and vice versa, I suppose.
Do you think ADHD has played a part in you becoming a leader and a CEO?
Yes. Yeah. So one great thing with ADHD, I suppose, it's like the double-edged sword. My brain's all over the place. Sometimes that's, if I'm trying to focus on something, that can be a definite negative. But actually what it does lead me to is kind of different disparate things will kind of jostle together in my brain. And so I'll kind of find things that I might not otherwise, if I just if my brain went in straight lines, I wouldn't necessarily kind of see the intersections of things. I like to say I have like an underabundance of hesitation. I'll just try stuff. I'm like, why not? Just have a go, And I think it's the part of an ADHD brain. I think that because there's this almost soup of different things going on, when something's remarkable, like you kind of adrift in a choppy sea sort of thing, and there's a lighthouse, it really is a beacon to focus you into. And so you have something which is exciting or interesting, it feels good, because actually it isn't fun having your brain like soup, whatever. Having a clear sense of direction is much nicer. It's not a choice. And so, but then when you have something where you think, "Oh, that's a good idea, that could do really well," that kind of like little spark of sort of dopamine, I suppose, is compelling to follow. And so, it's not sort of, it's kind of obvious. If you try stuff, you achieve stuff sometimes. You can only score the goals that you shoot and all that. And so certainly there's a kind of like, had a go at something and it works. But equally, like I'm a terrible employee. I'm really not good at doing what I'm told. I'm not naughty, but I don't stop to think sometimes that I'm like, but I think it's like this, and I just get on with it. And I'm very sure that I'm very annoying to all prior employers. However, working for myself, I've only got myself to blame, so it's fine. Or Rob, my co-founder, who, which is a good working relationship, but it's equitable, and it's that sort of I suppose the thing that I said I found hard at university, that sort of being picked apart, and the RSD thing, that being autonomous feels safer, and so I tend to gravitate to that and with a little bit of creative spark. It's, you know, I like the adrenaline. I'm adrenaline fueled, basically.
Yeah.
Adrenaline and caffeine.
How have your own experiences influenced the way you manage the EdShed team?
Partly, originally, I built the team in slight, I'm not going to say blind panic, but I was aware of the things that I'm not very good at. And so I tried to build a team around me with people who were good at the things that I was most likely to mess up, I suppose. And so you know, people like Angie, who's our COO, you know, you know, she's brilliant. But it was sort of the, you know, enabling me to do what I'm good at by having people who are good at the stuff that I'm not good at is a, you know, it's a definite strategy thing. I mean, in terms of like, you know, managing a team, there's two sides to it, isn't it? There's getting people to do what you want, or to work together in a way that means everything's coherent. And there's kind of you know, the other way around, which I think is, you know, an equally important part of leadership is like, it's looking after your team. And I think, you know, I try, there's a difficult balance to strike, because you've got to have, you know, a clear sense of direction. And I think a mediocre plan that is well executed is usually better than the best plan in the world that's delivered badly. And so I think what I try to do is keep one coherent sort of strategy, I suppose, and keep the team behind that. But I do, you know, also try to listen what people say. You know, we all want the best outcome, and so it's sort of like a funny sort of balance between, you know, there is one kind of view, but also everyone, I hope, feels that they're able to have an input in that. And I would want people to tell me if I'm doing something dumb. I want to know. I just think it's important that there's one clear vision. Equally, what we do, and I hope we do well, is stuff like look after the team, and we do also have quite a high proportion of neurodivergent staff. So I think we're something like 50% of the team are ADHD or autistic, and there's a certain amount of how we organize projects, and we're flexible, and we're, you know, again, there's difficult balances to strike, but creating an environment that allows our staff to be effective, I suppose, is more important than any particular one rule. And I think that comes from that's how I need to, you know, to be, you know, I work on the assumption that everyone is trying their hardest, and if they're not being successful, then it's not because they don't want to be successful. You know, nobody particularly wants to fail. Sometimes they need structure, sometimes they need guidance, sometimes they need support, sometimes they're having a bad day, and, you know, but I think if you work on a positive starting point, then people rise to it. Whereas if you work on the basis that everyone's trying to trick you and catch you out and be lazy and cynical, then all that happens is they just think, well, I'll do that anyway, you know, and they end up being lazy and not doing as good work as they can. But then if you trust them and they do well, it feels great. You're like, hey, I succeeded, and I own this success. And then then, you know, people want more of that, and so it's like a self-sustaining sort of strategy, I think.
How do you think like having ADHD, or like having a high percentage of people who are neurodiverse in EdShed influenced EdShed products?
Unwittingly, I think quite a lot. I think there's a thing, particularly in Spelling Shed, I've been saying at expos for you know, since the beginning, really, which what it does is it works on the basis that no one likes the experience of failure. So what it does is it enables children to be successful. They have all the support we can give them, but we just reward them more when they're more successful with less support. So they know they'll get more points and more honeypots if they go on a level which has no scaffolding, but they don't have to do that. And so, but then while they're playing, they're getting these little pings and the little dopamine hits of like, hey, I got it right. And they come out of that feeling positive, and so they do it again, and then they do it again, and they feel better, and they do it again. And hey, they've practiced it loads, and they get better because they've practiced it. And it's that balance of the little sort of refocusing dopamine thing and a sense of success that essentially all we're doing is we're giving clear structure, but we're enabling children to practice more. And, you know, I think the spelling particularly, there's, you do do the old bad way where you give kids 10 words, tell them to go and learn them. You don't tell them how. You're going to have a test. Some turn up and get 10 out of 10 because they can do it fine. The majority will put some effort in. They'll try and rote memorize them, get 7 or whatever the kind of requirement is, and probably forget them straight away. And then the remainder will just not even bother, and they'll get 0 out of 10 and they don't bother because they know they're going to get 0 out of 10. So why would they bother? Why would you put a load of effort into something that you're going to fail? And those are the children who, with Spelling Shed, they practiced it. They did the game because the game felt good. And then the happy coincidence was they happened to get to be good at spelling. And then they realized, hey, I could actually not get 0 out of 10. I've had, back in the beginning when I was a teacher and sort of using my own products, I had one particular girl who was exactly that. And she kind of latched into this game, and then she played like 50 games this one week and got 10 out of 10 on the spelling test, and was literally like disbelief, like, how has this happened? Really? 10 out of 10? How has this happened to me? Like, and you could see she grew in like, like, I can do this, and that feels great. And it has such an impact on those kids that disproportionately they need it the most anyway. So and I think that's part of why Spelling Shed took off, because it just hit the kids who needed this thing the most with the right answer for them. I suppose in other products, Math Shed similarly, there's lots about focus and attention, and rigor. Phonics Shed, there's a particular thing with the stories in Phonics Shed. So the way I kind of like to think about it, I met a guy called Ed. Ed was a founder at a startup that was about language learning called Memrise, if you want to look him up. And he is also a memory champion. So he's got this thing of like, you memorize decks of cards and whatever. And he did a talk, which was great, but he talked about some of the strategies that he used. And one of those was a thing called the method of loci, or a memory palace. And the idea is you intentionally build a journey in your mind through the things that you're going to learn. And because your brain is built to remember sequence, because that's how the real world works, it kind of tricks your brain into remembering this really detailed sequence of things. And I think when you have that's the same as, say you lose your keys, which I do quite often. You're like, okay, I walked in the house, I shut the door, I went up the stairs, I put my coat down, I went, and you can remember like all those. You can play back what happened, because that's how your brain is built. And so you have a story. A story is just like a secondhand experience. So it might come in a different way, but it's the same inside your brain. Your brain remembers this sequence of occurrences. They just happen to an imaginary character. And then for us, like, you have Billy the Bull is ill, and you've got the double L sound at the end of a word, and you go, oh, it's like Billy the Bull. Billy the Bull is ill, and oh, it's the double L. It's that all sound. And so you give them that kind of experience that they can play back, that they can then, it's instead of like all this disparate abstract information, once you've got something, you've got an anchor point, then it's only a little step to get to the learning. And so demarcating this really broad, abstract, confusing mesh of graphemes and phonemes, suddenly children go, I know that one. I know this is Lily the Ladybird, or this is Dylan the Lynx, or this is Albie the Cookie Thief, and then they kind of got a way to, they know what little journey to walk their minds through. And for children who, back to ADHD, for children who struggle with attention, that's where it becomes that soup thing again, where you've got all these graphemes, all these phonemes, and you've lost attention at just the wrong moment, and you're like, well, how do I separate this stuff? And making the learning kind of clear and novel and I say demarcated and experiential just makes it remarkable that they can kind of keep it separate. And I think that, again, it was a thing that we invented before I realized I had ADHD. But intuitively, for me, if I'm learning, I need to have some way to keep this stuff separate. And so that's what those stories do. And absolutely, it's it works for everybody. Everybody benefits if you demarcate learning and make it clear cut. Systematic synthetic phonics is a thing for a reason. But again, it's disproportionately, you want to teach in an inclusive way, having stuff that is sort of extra effective for the kids who might find it extra hard, that's how you build inclusivity, isn't it?
Yeah. And the multi-sensory side of it
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
for sure. That's it.
So you had an ADHD diagnosis within, I think, the last 2 years. What's changed since you've had that diagnosis?
First of all, so I got a diagnosis because I basically got to a point of burnout. I just worked as hard as I possibly can for about 10 years. And I just got to a point where I was exhausted effectively. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And I of all places found lots of silly memes about ADHD. And I was like, yeah, well, I do that. And I do that. Oh, and I do that. Hang on a minute, And then went through the process, got a diagnosis of that. And then there was a period of like getting my head around it, I suppose. Lots of like replaying past experience and going, oh, that's why I did that, and it was a bit disorienting, and like you sort of part of ADHD and other things is the idea of masking. So you're pretending to be normal all the time, and actually, I mean, that's the whole normal, not normal is the whole thing, but you're pretending to be different to your nature, I suppose. You're holding it in, and that takes quite a lot of effort. And then there was a bit of like, I do it so much all the time. How much, what's me and what's masking, and how do you tell them apart? Which is quite difficult at the time, but you get through. And then I think then I kind of got to terms with it, and I think now I'm much more like I sort of let myself sort of ride the waves, if you like. I have periods of being super full of energy, and then I have periods where I kind of need to take it a bit more easy, or have something that catches my interest, and I kind of stop fighting myself, but also try and make sure that I'm within sensible bounds, and I don't go off and do anything too crazy, which is debatable sometimes. But I'm definitely better for kind of a bit less sort of tethered to sort of like, I've got to do things the way that I think other people think I should do it. And I just kind of, and equally, I recognize I'm very lucky really that, I'm founder of a company. I think, don't you tell him the idea, but I think Rob and Alex could probably push me out if they work together, but let's hope they don't. But pretty much I've got no one really to answer to apart from my peers, and I make sure that my job's done well, and after that, I'm successful enough, I suppose. I don't feel like I've got anything particularly to hide, and so I just kind of let myself go where my brain wants to take me, which there's a certain amount of learning to trust your own judgment, I suppose. And I talked about this a lot at the time with the team. Partly, I mean, that's maybe my strategy, if I sort of verbalize things when they're in my head and they come out my mouth. But I did sort of recognize that I probably wasn't the only one. And, I sort of thought, I'm all right. But actually, it was hard, to get your head around. So I sort of thought, if I talk about it, and other people are quietly struggling, then if it helps people people in the company and people around me to sort of understand, doesn't particularly bother. I wasn't ashamed. I was like, I felt a bit silly that it took, it's like, is there anything more ADHD than taking 4.5 decades to realize that you're ADHD? But I was like a revelation, but it wasn't something that I felt I needed to hide a bit. I think it explained quite a lot. And a lot. Then the other thing that happened is all my friends were like, yeah, I'm me, and and we're like, maybe I am, and you realize that thing that people that I feel comfortable with, actually by and large they're similar to me. So actually I didn't have anything to hide anyway, because the people around me were the same as me. So
So we've talked a little bit about that, like how do you handle the balance between masking and being open about your ADHD? And how do you manage yourself as an adult now? Like, what strategies do you think you've found helpful?
I've learned to sort of watch what my brain's doing to some extent, and I kind of let myself, I have to just let it go off on its little little adventure to wherever, because otherwise it will, that's where you get to feeling kind of stressed, and it comes out in an unhealthy way. In terms of managing myself practically, I try and like there's a sort of something with ADHD. It's like a sort of a time blindness thing. Like there's things I can do now, and there's things I can do not now, and there isn't really an in between. So I'm either going to do a thing, or I'm going to put it on a list. I want to make a calendar event, and then the systems will make sure that I do the right thing and I don't forget stuff. And I'm a bit paranoid about missing stuff, and so setting the right reminders and all that stuff. I'm sort of trying to force myself to do that stuff. My phone basically tells me what to do, and that's fine. I talked about the team around me. I've sort of tried to give myself compensation in terms of the things that I know I would find hard, or anything that I'm worried that I might break. I not pass the buck, but I de-risk it by making sure that there's somebody that's a safe pair of hands to deal with that stuff. And then in terms, I mean, sort of some of it is stuff that we sort of do internally. Like there's a sort of a sort of thing that you say as a joke, and then you're like, it's like I don't do my homework. I never did my homework as a kid. And the thing is, a time blindness. It's not that I'm not willing. It's trying to find the right time for a thing. It's quite hard. So I try to encourage things to be kind of time boxed. So, if you want me to do something, you need my full attention, and it needs to be in my calendar at a time. If a document comes to me, I look at it and go, yeah, I'll read that later. But really, we all know I won't. So I will mean to. Yeah. But in reality, it just disappears. Something else comes along, and I can fight that. But it's really hard, and that's where I know I become unreliable. And actually, you can avoid that completely by just working in a different way and just having, let's just have a talk about this thing at this time. We'll go through it, and then I don't have to carry all this baggage of stuff that I'm going to let people down with. I just say it's in the calendar. I'll turn up, I do the thing, and then I forget about it, and that enables me to carry less weight, and be much more effective on the things that I do need to deal with in that particular now. You know what I mean? What else do I do? I wear my headphones a lot. Noise cancelling headphones. They're for the win. Just makes the world a little bit more kind of isolated. So it's like if I need to concentrate, I put my headphones in. I don't necessarily play any music, but it just makes me feel. It's like I've always got my headphones. It's like right. It's like dressing for the job that you put your uniform on. It's a bit like that with my headphones. I put my headphones in, and I'm like, right, concentrate.
Yeah, and probably like the time boxing and things like seeing your like CEO doing it probably helps other people as well, because you're like, well, actually that strategy might work for me.
Yeah, well, so another good strategy, which is sort of comes in with the time boxing, is what's called body doubling. So, sort of having somebody alongside you as a sort of even if you're doing something different, the fact that there's someone there it just helps you focus, and it's that thing of my brain is trying to follow every little strand and it can't right now. Actually, having somebody else there just keeps you grounded, or having the right background music on, or like I like songs that I know really well, so I tend to listen to the same song over and over and over, because then I don't listen to the lyrics. But if it's the radio on and there's people talking, I find that quite distracting, because there's voices and I'm like, what are they saying? Or they'll say something like, oh, let's Google that.
That sounds interesting.
And so either silence or music that's just in the background or something that I know helps me focus. But being conscious of what works for me in terms of enabling me to be more focused and not distracting me is like a learning process. I don't know how much of that's common to everybody, but that's what works for me anyway.
Yeah. I know quite a difficult question, but how do you avoid burnout?
Well, I think a lot of people, I think it's very common for late diagnosed people get diagnosed because they reach burnout. And burnout is basically like a kind of mental exhaustion thing. Like and there's no quick answer to get out the other side. Recognizing when you're doing too much and not saying yes to everything is important, but it's really hard. And it can be that your capacity one day can be very different to another, and so and that's what I've definitely got wrong in my life a lot of times is I will take stuff on when I'm at like peak capacity, and then I'm not at peak capacity anymore, and I'm like, there's just too much going on, and I'm like, I'm doing too much. I need to offload some stuff, and learning to pace yourself and not take on every single new project. Finishing things occasionally is a good contributor to that. I might try and learn that one day. Yeah, but it's hard. It's difficult because, and it's like the bit of blindness that where you're kind of adrenaline driven. You just follow the interesting thing, but you just collect projects, and then they kind of bury you at a certain point. But you do have to be kind of mindful of it.
Yeah, it's so easy to just keep saying as well,
or
keep having more and more ideas.
Yeah, and the thing is, sometimes I can absolutely on a good on my best days, I can take on the world. I can do everything, but it doesn't necessarily last, and it'll kind of wax and wane, and then you get to those days where I'm out of steam, and suddenly, instead of me pulling the world along, the world's pulling me along, and I'm like, dragged on the floor, and it's really hard to judge when you feel one way, how you'll be able to cope with that when you don't have the same kind of energy.
What advice would you give to a young person with ADHD, or what advice would you give to your younger self?
I kind of wish I'd known, to be honest. Getting diagnosed at 45 is, and it's helped, but I could have, I could have had a lot less stress in my life, I think, if I'd have just realized why certain things were the way they were. I think not letting yourself and not letting the negative voice kind of creep in too much, not seeing yourself. I think that's the good thing about diagnosis is there's a big difference between sort of different and less, I suppose. The thing, and I'm different. I'm less good at some stuff, but I'm not less myself. I'm more good. I'm more good at English. I'm better at some things. I'm worse at some things, but I'm just different. And I think it's very easy to focus on the stuff that other people can do that you can't, and that negative self-image. I think surround yourself with positive role models. Like there's some statistics that if you're ADHD, you're 3 times more likely to be an entrepreneur, you're 10 times more likely to be in jail, and I think that's the kind of the extremes, but you want to be in the first one, not the second one, and that comes down to the people around you. So, but it's very easy to get drawn into the wrong exciting stuff, or to sort of punish yourself because you see yourself as faulty or broken or bad or whatever, and particularly the kids who do really struggle with the environment around them and end up just feeling like the world's against them. Like, it doesn't have to be. I think that's the thing. And and there's obviously a certain amount of the other people in the environment, but keeping yourself sort of trying to keep a positive view of yourself and doing positive things like sport and helping other people. I kind of think if something I loved about teaching, and particularly like younger children, is if I'm worrying about them, I'm not worrying about me. And so it's the kind of like, if you're just worrying about other people's well-being, actually your well-being kind of improves anyway. And it's watching that kind of negative view where you start kind of a bit of sort of self-loathing and stuff, and that doesn't really help anybody at all. And it's not necessary.
Yeah. And then the final question is, what would you say to teachers who want to better support children with ADHD in their classroom?
So I think the first thing is learning to tell the difference with the undiagnosed kids. Obviously you've got the kids who fit the stereotype, who've got a diagnosis, who've got medication maybe, fine. But then there's something that I think I've become quite good at since getting an ADHD diagnosis is seeing other people. I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, you're ADHD, and I can just tell, and I can't tell you how. It's like pattern recognition or whatever, but it's like, you can, there's a world of difference between can't and won't, and you've got children who they're not sitting still and they're messing around, and absolutely it might be that they're just being disrespectful and they're messing around, or they've, you know, it could be that there's all sorts of stuff going on at home. It could be that they're ADHD, you know, and I think trying to keep things positive, trying not to put demands on children rather than offer them a best option, I think is a good general strategy. Not punishing, you know, and absolutely no teacher wants to do, but like, you know, it's a disability, you know, and I think an analogy of like, you know, someone with a physical disability, you would never kind of act in a way that kind of made them feel ashamed for what they can't do. But I think it's quite easy to not realize that a child's got a you know, a neurodevelopmental disability, and actually they can't sit still. They want to sit still. They know they can't sit still. You don't have to tell them. And I think it's really important to be rigorous with children, have high expectations for behavior. But it's always best, I think, to err on the side of caution. And, you know, children respect you if you meet them in the middle, I think. And equally, it's a tough old job. And when you've got a class who are going in 1,000 directions, you know, you've got to keep some degree of order. But just remembering that they can't help it, I think, is, or that they can have it, you know, maybe a little bit if they really try. But that's the positive, that's the reward, you know. And it's like, you know, there's a slightly controversial, there's a behavior management strategies that revolve around rewards, and there's a whole book about that's very popular for good reason. There's good stuff in there about recognizing sort of intrinsic motivation and stuff. Some kids, in my humble opinion, benefit from a direct reward. Some kids need a metaphorical pat on the head, a well done, a sticker, a thing on a chart, and I personally don't see a problem with that. Obviously, you have to do it fairly and you have to do it equitably, but kids aren't dumb. Yeah, they know the kids who appreciate it and the ones who don't really care, you know. And I think for some kids, if it's like a tipping point thing where you can see that they're you know, they want to, but they feel unsafe, a little reward to say that they fully see that you're behind them can make an absolute world of difference. And then they'll put every effort into making, you know, doing the thing you want them to do, and they'll feel valued rather than worthless. And to me, you know, I think that's a more important kind of thing than whether they're sitting still on one particular day and they've got to just accept that nobody has rewards because we should do it, because we should see the inherent value of it. But it's harder for them, isn't it? So it's still not fair, is it?
Yeah, and I suppose it's that being mindful of like the past experiences of children with ADHD and whether they've had negative comments and they're used to.
Well, and children with ADHD, who, you know, it's genetic. So children with ADHD, quite often their parents have ADHD. Quite often the parents don't realize they have ADHD. They struggle with stuff, and there's a whole kind of cycle of kind of challenges and kind of negative self-views and unhealthy behavior and all that sort of stuff that can kind of creep in, and sort of seeing through that, and I mean, not seeing it as, it's not a continuum, you know. There's like the spectrum of autism and stuff, but it's, you either are or you are not, you know. It's like there's, you know, there's dyslexic, ADHD, autistic, some combination of that, or none of those, you know. Those are the categories, and all right, there is variation within those, but you're either ADHD or you're not. And I think treating everybody like they're neurotypical, or everyone like they're ADHD, or everyone like they're autistic is never going to be the right solution. And so I think that's where a lot of classrooms and a lot of schools, I think what they try to do is be fair, and actually what they do is apply a consistent thing to some kids who aren't consistent. A soapbox.
Right, that was really good, and it's good to find out like how people can help, but how like the experiences that children might be having based on yourself. So thank you very much.
No worries.